welcome to The Whole Elephant. This is a series where I am going to talk about political and economic concepts in a way that is, I hope, very clear and very simple. It's called The Whole Elephant because of a very ancient story. It talks about a few blind people being led into a room and there is an elephant in the room. So each person is able to perceive the elephant only through the small amount of elephant that they can touch. Right, so the person that's touching the elephant's trunk thinks that it's a big snake. The person that is feeling its ear thinks that they're in a room with a big tree that has broad leaves. The person that's touching the leg thinks that it's a pillar. And each person shares their interpretation. They start to argue because they are only able to kind of perceive that little part of the elephant that is close to them. And I think that this is a great metaphor for a lot of political and economic discussion that I see in the world. And by the way, when I say political and economic, I don't necessarily mean just theoretical. I mean, all discussion, all opinions are to some extent political or to some extent economical, or both, usually both. And it sort of frustrates me because I see people talking past each other a lot or not really understand where each other's coming from. And, you can be in a situation where everyone's right in some way, but the reason that they're disagreeing is because they're only kind of touching on a small part of the core issue. I'm not going to pretend that I'm like a political expert or an economic academic or anything like that. But I think what I am quite good at is understanding what is behind the questions that people ask or the reactions that people have. And what I want to do is to make some content that illuminates the whole elephant so that everyone can see the shape of what the actual problem is. I'm not going to pretend to be apolitical. I think that anyone who tells you that they're apolitical wants you to think that they're apolitical for some reason. I don't think that anyone is truly apolitical, and actually one of the concepts that I want to talk about at some point is going to be, why people create these situations, these low information situations where they kind of want you to believe that they have a certain slant or a lack of a slant. Instead of pretending that these videos are going to be apolitical, what I want to say is that I hope that everyone can get something out of them. I hope to explain things in a way which kind of encourages people to look behind their initial reactions, to look behind maybe the headlines, and have a kind of a bit more of a material analysis of what's going on behind the scenes. So to be open about what my slant is, I would say that I'm, politically relatively left-wing, socially very progressive, economically, definitely more on the wealth redistribution, economic redistribution, and more state involvement in economic direction side. I'm pretty influenced by socialist ideas and by left-wing ideas in general. But having said that, I hope, and this might be futile, but I still hope that people who consider themselves on different parts of the political spectrum, to use a phrase that I hate, still can get something out of this. But because the way that I want to present these topics is to make it more accessible. And, I think that regardless of where you are or what your beliefs are or what your motivations are, I think that it helps everyone to have more understanding, to have a deeper understanding. And the reason for that is that you can't really have agency unless you have understanding, right? If you want to make choices about your life, if you want to make choices about where to live, what job to have, how to save your money, whether to buy a house, all of these choices are going to be driven by many different factors. And if you have an understanding of what those factors are, what influences them, and how they're likely to behave, that's going to empower you to make better decisions for you. And that's without at all trying to give you any kind of direction on what you do with that. For me, the most important thing is agency. A lot of people talk about concepts or are affected by issues, by ideas that can be life-changing, but the way that they respond to them or the way that they act is really just is based on not having a full understanding of what's going on behind it. So, and you just can't really have agency. You can't act deliberately and intentionally unless you have that background understanding. So I don't think I'm going to go super in depth on a lot of these topics. The idea isn't to give you a master class or like, you know, a super like deep analysis of a lot of things, but it's to help draw the connection between disparate concepts. So, you know, between the trunk, the ear, the foot of the elephant. When you start to see the bigger picture, you know, you can go deeper and you can get to do that deep analysis yourself if you want to, if not, whatever. But I do think it serves everyone well to have a bit more of that basic understanding. So related to this is something that I kind of want to have a small rant about now, which is that these concepts do not have to be complicated. I think there's this view that people have that politics and economics is very boring, it's dense, you know, there's a lot of maths involved, there's graphs, charts, stats, and everything's very difficult to, and everything's like very difficult to understand. But that's just not the case. Most of these ideas, most of the things that happen in politics and economics is simple. It's very simple to understand, but there's a whole industry of people who, you know, overcomplicate it for various reasons, right? There are people who overcomplicate it because it justifies their reason for existence, because, you know, their analysis is being sold to companies or to state actors or whatever it is. There are people who complicate it because if more people, if the public understands these concepts better, then they are empowered to ask for more things or ask for things that matter. There's a lot of energy right now in the world, especially among the masses in the West, the United States. And the thing that worries me is that that energy is going to be directed and channeled in ways that are not efficient for that energy to be used, right? Like there's a tempo aspect of it where there's a time, there's a place for energy, and if that time and place passes, then maybe we won't ever see change or we won't ever see progress being made. But I don't think that that energy can be used in a way that's actually efficient and achieves the results that the people want and need, unless there is first an understanding of what the whole elephant looks like, so that it's easier to find the pivot points that help people kind of move the elephant one way or another. All right, that's enough ranting from me for now. Let's get into the first video. I hope you enjoy. So today we're going to be discussing the links between wages, prices, and inflation. And we're doing this because of some discussions that I saw after the announcement of the new Mario Kart from Nintendo. So recently, Nintendo made a big announcement and said that the new Mario Kart is going to cost roughly $1 million to buy. I mean, it's not actually $1 million, it's like 80, but much more than we've been used to paying for AAA titles. So a lot of gamers are really angry about this. Other commentators, including game devs, have defended it, pointing out that, you know, video game prices haven't risen in line with inflation. And some people have even suggested that paying more for games might mean that the game devs will get paid more as well. I think for most people who are interested in games and who are part of a gaming community, you know, they have a lot of sympathy for the developers, right? Because wages are stagnating, studios are closing all over the place. So, you know, there's been kind of this suggestion that if we pay more for games, that means that devs are going to get paid more. So today we're going to dig in and ask the questions: why haven't video game prices kept up with inflation? And does paying more for video games mean that the hardworking developers are going to get paid better? To kind of dive into this, first of all, what we really need to understand is what prices are. Like, what drives a company to set prices for their product at a certain amount? The simplistic view that I had for many years, and that I'm sure many people have, is that prices are something like costs plus profit, right? The cost of making or producing something plus whatever the profit the company needs to make, and that's where the company is going to set the price. When we're talking about games, the cost of making a game is mostly going to be labor, which is the wages of the people making the game. So in this kind of simplistic world, it does make sense to think that if prices go up, that means that there's probably more for game devs, assuming that the profits stay the same, right? But that's not actually what's going on at all. Like, the idea that prices are a reflection of costs is just not true. The very fact that the prices of games haven't risen in line with inflation is proof of that. So to answer our questions, we need to figure out what prices actually are. Prices in a market economy are determined by three things, right? Supply, demand, and the profit margin. Essentially, they're a reflection of how much the company thinks that the buyer is willing to pay for the product at the time that the price is being set. So let's think about something really simple, like apples. For physical goods, the supply is going to be limited by material factors. For example, how many apples have you harvested this year, right? The fewer apples that have been harvested, the higher the apple prices go. This is called scarcity. When more people start growing apples, more supply becomes available and prices go down, right? That's called competition. For digital goods, scarcity doesn't really work in the same way as it does for physical goods. There's no actual limit to how many copies of a game can be downloaded from Steam. There is a limit, though, in the number of different games of a certain quality, genre, or IP at one time, right? So if you really want to play a great racing game, there are only so many new titles that you can buy. And if you really want to play a Mario Kart game, well, there's only one title you can buy, right? And that's called a monopoly. All IPs are inherently monopolies. With major studios closing their doors, we can expect fewer AAA games to come out every year, which means that the ones that do come out can command a higher price due to lower competition. Game studios have also figured out that they can create artificial scarcity. So for example, they can charge tons more to those who want to play the game a few hours before everyone else gets to. So what about demand? Well, games are usually bought with disposable income. So the demand for them depends on how much disposable income people have, right? I mean, in a downturn, people should have less money to spend on games. But that's actually too simplistic of a view as well. In reality, there are a lot of different factors that affect demand for games. Maybe the economic downturn means that people can't afford to go on expensive trips anymore, but they can still spend a smaller amount on a game. Maybe people are desperate for something that helps them escape the reality of the capitalist hellhole we live in and our burning planet, and that drives them to spend more money on games, right? IP, as well as being a monopoly, is also a way of generating demand through peer and cultural pressure. So how does profit fit into all of this? Well, classic market capitalism treats profit as an incentive to do something. So if the profits are high in selling apples, more people are incentivized to grow apples. If the profits are high in making games, then more studios are incentivized to make games. The idea is that if profits go down or below zero, then the market quote-unquote readjusts as capital will move to other industries. So I think this is a pretty simple concept that most people get, but a complicating factor in the modern day is that profit margins aren't really just incentive anymore. In our society, they're a directive demanded by institutional investors because the companies are really owned by institutional investors, most of them. And they've put their money in these companies and they want a specific return and they want to see results on a quarterly basis. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff like dividends, share buybacks, blah, blah, blah. Extremely long rant that we can skip most of. But essentially, what we need to remember is that the whole of our economy is built around not only the profit incentive, but short-term maximal profit incentive. And that's very different from, productive long-term profit. And what that means is that the incentive isn't to just make money, it's to push the limits of what they think the consumer, in this case, what they think gamers will pay now, and not really care whether that is going to destroy long-term engagement or confidence in the product. So in reality, prices, not just cost plus profit margin, prices are determined by a whole bunch of factors that affect either supply or demand and the profit directive. if not enough profit is being made, studios are going to close. We've seen that. So now that we've established what prices really are, let's think about the question of whether game prices going up means there's more money or whether there's more job security for developers. And I'm going to spoiler alert this right now. The answer is no. The reason is that wages are not just costs, right? Wages are actually their own market, they're prices. And they're the prices in the market for labor. So if there's a higher supply of game devs than studios need, then wages are going to go down. If there are not enough game devs, wages are going to go up. And this is where inflation actually comes in. And I think there's this misunderstanding about inflation where people think it's just a magical number that says prices have gone up by this amount. I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but inflation happens because of kind of the value and amount of currency that's in circulation. But what's important here is, what inflation actually means in our kind of model, right? So inflation is a cost for workers. So if we think about the prices of wages, inflation is a cost. But as we've seen, prices don't really depend on costs, right? Prices depend on supply and demand. So in today's world, the labor market for game development is global, and studios will employ cheaper labor if they can, whether that's AI, devs who live in smaller economies, or simply by paying existing workers less, e.g. by not raising their wages in line with inflation. But remember how profit is an incentive? So if studios make more money, as long as there's still enough of a supply of workers, of the devs, they're incentivized not to raise wages. There's just no reason for them to. As an aside, if labor was supposed to be in an equitable world treated as a market in the same way as goods and services, then we would see people in oversupplied jobs move to undersupplied jobs. But in the real world that we occupy, and not the world that economists kind of create in their minds, that's not how it works, right? People don't just acquire new skills overnight. They don't just leave industries that they're passionate about. They don't move across the country at the drop of a hat. Of course, that raises a whole bunch of other questions about how we should be treating labor and how we should be treating wages, if not as a market, but that's for another time. So let's go back to our questions that we started with. Firstly, why haven't video game prices kept up with inflation? And secondly, does paying more for video games mean that hardworking developers are going to be paid better? And what we've actually learned is that these two questions are both sides of the same coin. They're both asking, why are prices not reflective of costs? Well, hopefully this video helps you understand the underlying reasons for that a little bit better. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed, let me know. I'm planning on making more of these, but I'm pretty new to YouTube and to kind of video editing in general. So if you have any tips or tricks, I would be glad to hear them. And if you think I was wrong about something, great. I want you to think critically about what I'm saying. I also don't think that I'm going to be right about everything. I'm extremely comfortable with being wrong. I'm also in a process of learning. And I also hope to be improving the way that I express myself and the quality of these videos as we go. All right, I'll see you next time on The Whole Elephant.